you guys today. We're going to be recording the episode thanks to our partners at Octosmos, Todd, and we'll be publishing it on Orion Growth YouTube channel when we're done. Somewhere in here, the VP of Community for Open Campus, Sarah, you've probably met with her. Her team works really hard to get our guests accommodated with avatars and tech issues and general wayfinding. So thank you, OC team. We appreciate everything you're doing to help us make navigating the unfamiliar easier. John Ramser is here from Orion. He's capturing footage too. So make sure you take a second if you have time to introduce yourself and talk with him about the experience. It'll help us to build some more content. With that, I'm going to introduce our guest, Denise Brouder. Denise is the founder and head of data and insights at S2E2 Workplace. It's a B2B learning and development consultancy that specializes in optimizing performance and hybrid work models through measurable behavior change. Denise holds an MBA from Fordham and has a BS in finance and economics from University of Limerick in Ireland. She lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children and finds inspiration for S2E2 on early morning runs. Welcome, badass mama jamma, Denise Brouder.
Finally,
Also,
somebody called me by my right name.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We also have Melissa Fisher, PhD. Melissa is a senior advisor at CFAR Consulting and Coaching Services, where she focuses on workplace culture and design. A cultural anthropologist, she has extensive experience studying and consulting on organizations, culture, and the built environment. She's also affiliated with the Global Foresight Project based out of Swedish Collegium for Advanced Studies, New York University's Institute for Public Knowledge, and the Conference Board. She teaches in the Human Capital Management Department at NYU Professional Studies. She's actively bridged business and academia through her career. She has published 2 books with Duke University Press, Frontiers of Capital, Ethnographic Reflections on the New Economy of 2006, and Wall Street Women, 2012. She's currently working on a trade book entitled Anthropology, Ethnography, and the Global Reimagining of Work, which explores how workplace experts, like us, shape future work environments in the context of pandemics. Cannot wait to hear more about that. In addition to a successful career, her work has been featured by publications like the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, NPR, and the BBC. As you can tell, she too is one badass mama jamma. So we're excited to have you both for the discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
That was awesome. And I just want to say up front, it's been so cool how this session has come together. I actually got most in connection with Denise, even though I sort of knew her loosely, through her going on Chris Hurd's podcast, where she triggered the shit out of me by sort of going against some of the Chris Hurd isms that I think kind of maybe define aspects of how I'm living my life. So at first I was like, oh man, should I even tune in? And then we became really close friends fast, even though we've never met and only been talking for a little while. And she then connected us to Melissa. And we've probably had one of the coolest DM exchanges that we've ever had, on Chris, before we do a session. So I'm really appreciative that you guys are both here. Thank you guys so much.
So much fun.
All right, so let me kick it. Are we in this world? Are we cyborgs or are we humans? Existentially, that's kind of the whole point of this conversation. We're trying to get to the bottom of how we're really feeling right now. And we're trying to get to the bottom of who we are and where we're going. And these are profound questions to try to answer on September 19th, 2023. And, why is now a profound time? I think it's because we're officially expected to be normal again in every aspect of our life. I'm hoping one day we'll be able to use air quotes inside the metaverse, but please know I'm channeling air quotes right now. So I want to rant a couple of questions at you. When was the last time the whole world went through the same thing at the same time? Do you remember what it was like to go panic shopping before the lockdown started? Do you remember hearing about the clear skies in some of the most polluted places on Earth when the world shut down? Do you remember your darkest moments during COVID where you just couldn't bear any more stress, heartache, or loss, either personally or just for the world around you? Do you remember George Floyd? Do you remember the images of the first sort of part of the war in the Ukraine? How did all of that make you feel, and how are you feeling now? These are the kind of things we want to try to get into today, because we've all gone through the ringer in our own way, and I really think that we still are, And a lot of that, I think, is being lost by the fact that we're supposed to be returning to normal. And all of this shit has been compressed into such a short and yet ever so long amount of time. It's not over. We're still in it. And I think in reality, we are always in it. And what I'm reading you right now, I formed yesterday. And as I wrote it, without really giving you the specific details of my inner thoughts, here's what was going on for me. I just got off the phone with a recruiter in an attempt to help me navigate a new chapter in my career. I knew the call was going to go nowhere, and I was right. And in it not going well, the existential dread kind of came in, the financial stress that I'm currently facing, the identity crisis that I'm currently facing. But I knew I had a choice. I could feel sorry for myself, or I could go write this intro. I chose to write it, but I also didn't really have a choice because I wasn't going to let down the amazing team that I think a version of God that I don't really quite understand, that I have them, because I might have let me down if I was allowed to sit with some of the shit that surfaces inside me right now. The trauma that I went through in the pandemic, the reconnection to childhood wounds that surfaced for me because of the side effects of the pandemic, the relationships that I lost or I let go, or the worry that I have for the future in just about every way. Instead, I chose to put down some really fucking calm music in my ears, and I just started to free associate. I made a choice to put words down and trust they would take me somewhere. Well, here is that somewhere. It unfolded for me yesterday when I typed it, and now it's unfolding for you as I'm speaking it. And while I do have a lot of pain, a lot of fear, and a lot of dread, I'm also really fucking grateful. I have literally the best kid on earth, and I know that we all feel that way, but she's my heart. I have the best partner in the world. My partner and I just actually invited our collective best friend to come and live with us for a while. I have the best platform to express my creativity through this conversation series, Inspired People, Inspired Places. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, John. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Todd. I have people from all around the world who know me, even though they've never met me. And I use that term really loosely because right now we're all meeting. And these people will take my call and let me vent or be whatever I need to be. I want to shout out Denise in this respect because she's a new one on my team. And it is a team because it cuts both ways. And I have the gift of being able to get deep with all of you in a new modality, a virtual world, to have a conversation that matters. And that's what we're here to do today. We are here to have a conversation that really matters. We're here to talk about how we're really feeling. And I hope that we can peel back the layers together, because how we are feeling can't just be about one thing or another. It has to be about everything. So before we get into our first question, I want to ground us in an example of how the pandemic bound us all together as a reminder of what we had, what we've managed to keep, and what we might be losing at this moment in 2023. So Chris, can you roll the clip?
That was awesome, by the way. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Do we get sound or are we struggling on sound?
I don't know if we even need sound. I think we all know exactly what this is and how it ties into what you just said, Dave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It moved me and my wife yesterday. It was actually my wife who shared it with me. I was asking them, my wife and our friend, you know, what things you remember about our shared experience. And my wife brought this guy up. And he had another video that went completely viral. And the three of us sat in the kitchen and we all started crying, if I'm honest. But yeah, it's a group of people it's two guys from Spain. They'd never met each other. They connected online, isolated from one another, and played some music together. If we can get it back, great. But if not, I think, as Denise said, we get the point. So I'm just going to kick it off with a really simple two-part question. I'm going to start with Denise. Denise, how are you feeling? And how are you experiencing this post-pandemic moment?
Well, I was feeling pretty good until I got here. And I mean that only because it's not very often that people are really willing to have an honest conversation. And you've clearly set the table for that, literally the table in front of us. So it's bringing up in me a lot of emotions that I've been carrying for a long time since the post-pandemic stuff. I think we're post-pandemic is the stress that happened during it, the stress after. You mentioned like George Floyd, all these things that are happening in the world around us is very chaotic, and it's also very personal. And I think we've all created this space, this cavernous space within us, where we're carrying this with us. But in our day to day, we have to be bright and shiny and show up in certain ways and causing this kind of disconnect between who we are. So overall, I am feeling great and really thrilled to understand what everyone here thinks about the exact same question that you asked.
Thank you. Thank you for being honest. Melissa, can you give us your thoughts on that as well? How are you feeling and how are you experiencing this post-pandemic moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone, I'm feeling a kind of mix of emotions. I wouldn't say thoroughly happy or thoroughly sad or completely anxious and completely. I think it's such a jointed kind of moment. And I do think, like what Denise said, there's, we had our public personas and our private personas, and they began to split and merge and dissolve in the midst of the pandemic. And I think we're kind of renegotiating how to knit how we present ourselves in really a more authentic way, in part because the acknowledgement of our mental states, that we were fragile, came to the fore, and as you said, in a much more global way than we had. Before, there were just so many dichotomies and ways that you hid yourself, ways that you presented yourself, and partially true. So I feel like that's very much at stake, both for myself and I think well. And I wanted to just draw on this idea of normalcy, right? Anthropologist, so normalcy is a cultural construction, right? It may depend on the particular culture or your gender. All kinds of things are up for grab. And rather than think that we're moving into a new normal, I would argue we're in what anthropologists call liminality or liminal space. So in a ritual, take a bar mitzvah or something like that, person who identifies as a boy goes into the bar mitzvah and comes out, quote unquote, a man, right? And in between the actual service is this liminal space in which they're betwixt, between. They're neither boy, neither man, right? And I think that we are in this betwixt and between moment, collectively and individually, which, because we've been in it for so long, the pre-times, the after times, the emerging times, behooves us to really find new ways of creating community, identity, and even rituals. And I would argue, just to finish up, that being in this metaverse is a new kind of ritual, a new way in which people can imagine their ties and identities together that might bring us much more close to one another and help us sort of re-glue some of the missing pieces, not necessarily in the same way that we thought of ourselves before the pandemic, but hopefully new ways, and that's the hopeful part, right? The reimagining, the rethinking, the more optimistic or utopian visions, hopefully we can co-construct.
That was super beautiful. Thank you for that. And I love that you brought in this new modality to kind of close that out, because I think that what we found with this sort of conversation series that we're running is that everybody that comes is showing up of their own volition, and everybody that's here has a curiosity for the other person's perspective. Last session, we had Sarah talk about how she felt like she was an introvert in person, but an extrovert here. And we had Earl Hogue, who's unfortunately not here today, talk about how he felt the opposite. And we had an incredible discourse around that. And that was awesome. So Denise, I don't want to move on to the next question here. I'm wondering if you want to respond to anything that Melissa said. I'm also wondering if you want to bring a little bit of your context related to your work in how we try to balance the needs of all of these different groups now that we have sort of awoken from all of this. Because, you know, to kind of come back to how me and you connected in the first place, you were poking the bear a little bit on the Chris Hurd stuff of just being a little bit reductionist in some of the thinking that he puts out. And I'm not here to call out Chris Hurd, that's not the point. But I think let's just talk about it in terms of like reductionist thinking in either side, right? Whether it's, you know, pro-office, pro-remote, whatever the case may be.
So I definitely wanted to respond to something Melissa said there, because I was dying myself to have time with her to ask some questions. And I think even when you talk about the issue with Chris Hurd, and him and I did have that initial conversation where I knew that we were on such polar opposite ends of the conversation, but at the heart, I also knew we were the same. We were looking at the same thing the same way. And I think that we've taken this concept of duality to such an extreme level that even your video there, Dave, earlier, those two folks on the balcony playing music, they're two different people that have never met. Their lives are inconsequential to each other. But there was a moment of singularity or oneness between them that was unmistakable. And I raise that because I wonder if part of the friction that we're all kind of carrying and feeling has to do with our almost not having confidence in what is real anymore, and what is reality. Like, is this reality right here, the screen that we're on? And I think that we're questioning what is real and what is not. And you can even look back further in time to look at a great example is the political sphere in the US. And when all this new politics came out, you had people within a family on two sides of the same table looking at the same political issue and seeing two totally different things. And I think that it has caused us to fundamentally question reality and what is real. And I raise that because, Melissa, the point you made about normalcy and what we consider normal, would that be what's causing this level of uncertainty that we are taking with us? And is it because we're living in such a world of duality that we forget that we are coming from the same place and towards the same things? What are your thoughts on that?
That's for me, right? I
Yes,
think that, you know, I think it's probably been the idea of there being multi-modalities that, you know, in this very fast moving world, that time and space have become increasingly compressed for a long time, not just before the pandemic, rather. Increasingly because we have, you know, the internet and ever faster ways to connect. So the ways in which we understood ourselves in relationship to other people has dramatically changed for the last couple decades, and then sort of came into like a whirlwind, right? Like a tornado when we went into the pandemic. And on the one hand, like life slowed down for a lot of us, not everyone, because there were people that had to go out and, you know, care nurses and so forth. Slowed down, became very sort of myopic, very homebound, very constricted, very narrow. And yet a lot of us went on to Zoom. We were able to go to talks. We created links with people. So I think there was like almost a kind of, you know, embodied distortion in a way. You know, that while you on the one hand aren't moving very much in front of the screen, your sort of thoughts and experiences and interactions with others are kind of exploding over space and time, and they're not just happening in the physical body, there's the digital body. And so it's not entirely clear to people who have generally, until the last couple decades, been primarily interacting in physical space and social interaction. So on the one hand, I think that these kinds of movement, these cyborgian movements, right, between, you know, technology and people, have a great precedence. I mean, the telephone, all kinds of, you know, technological communication and interaction between people and things have been happening, but there was such an accelerated mass movement that I think it's quite disorienting, actually. Quite disorienting. And I think it's really important. The high holidays were just occurred, the beginning of the high holidays. And I'm more spiritually religious and connected culturally for the most part. And I realized how important it was to physically be in the presence of others, praying, what that might mean and whatever God or lack thereof might mean. Because it was in the movement that we experienced. It was in putting arms around each other and singing. And in the rituals that we did that are specific to song, that are specific to the body. and that I didn't really have that connection when I went back home to go to services at another point in time. So, very hard. I think the disconnection and the anxiety that we all feel, and the who am I not, what is real, is really being produced by this very mind-altering, body-altering moment. The interesting thing here is that the pandemic brought to fore a lot of things that were happening, and a conversation that never have taken place on a local, national, let alone global or transnational level. And that's the kind of really compelling thing that, we would have never been together here in the metaverse to talk about these things, perhaps. I don't know. Had this all not happened, and I'm not sure that I would have felt entirely comfortable to be so reflective in a public manner. And I think that that's the beauty, that you recognize that, oh, I'm not alone in this, other people are anxious, other people are trying to figure this out, and that's very comforting, I think, at least to me.
Oh, Melissa, fucking amen.
Great answer.
Can I just sort of like you brought like into just my focus, like my own personal experience, and to go back to my like identity crisis thing for a second, like I grew up as a digital native, as a professional online poker player. I didn't know that's what I was at the time. And then I left the game. I'll skip all the details. I then became an office-based worker, and I did that for 8.5 years straight before the pandemic happened. And I kind of locked the door, shut the key on this guy who connected globally in the way that you just said, because it was a prerequisite actually to be a poker player. And then around like 18 months into the pandemic, my wife looked at me one day and she goes, Dave, when you removed the office as your primary place of engaging with the world, you just unlocked yourself and you became such a better person. And I experienced all those things that you just said. And I look at the connections that I have made in this time. They're so much deeper than a lot of the I shouldn't even, they're not even comparable. Like to say the people that I was proximate to in the office where I spent the majority of my time versus being remote to many of the people that I have met since, they're night and day different, and the virtual ones are exponentially better. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want to be with these people. I wish I could be around them all the time. And so I guess where I'm going with this, and I'd love to start with Denise, is like, how do we bridge the gap right now? How do we do things to like fix I don't know. I don't even know how to ask the question. Like, how do we deal with the fact that we've changed so much? And to Melissa's point, we would have maybe all not even felt comfortable being here right now, but here we are. And yet we're all supposed to go back to the office. Like, is the return to office, not the office itself or going there, but is the mandate like the ultimate gaslight? I guess is my question loosely.
So, we're here, like all of us around the table, because we've chosen to be here. There's something about this conversation we wanted to be in here for, and to be curious about and learn from each other. And in a work setting, we don't often choose people that we're around. And I think that sometimes in a traditional work setting, we only bring a fraction or the person we think is expected to show up, whether that's a certain behavior or a certain skill set. Because I think we as humans are multidimensional. I think there's all flavors and aspects and sizes, shades to all of us. And this conversation right here is bringing out one side of me. And I might be very different in a conversation with a client tomorrow. But in a work setting, I think it is very constrictive. And I think that you can't always choose who you work with. And you can't choose the terms. Because there's a governing body that's going to tell you where to show up, how long to stay there for, to do when you're there, how to look, how to act, how to behave, because you're going to get marked and judged and paid as such. And there's a certain amount, I think, of an absence of freedom, or conversely, this feeling of being owned, this ownership over a large part of your life that I think people are beginning to rally against. So we're speaking more openly and honestly here than we would if we were in a corporate boardroom in a work setting, in a traditional work setting. And I think that those are two very different dimensions. So it's really hard, Dave, like to choose to want to go to a corporate, do an office job and not be in a situation like this. So I think that kind of real underpinning of the nature of who are we and why are we here which are questions we never really materially stopped long enough to ask ourselves, because why? We never had that chance, and it was never a priority, but it is now. We have seen too much and we know too much to not at least stop long enough to ask, who am I? Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And it's giving us this, it's pulling out these other dimensions of ourselves and giving us a different perspective on the mark we're leaving in the world around us. And I think that's kind of causing us to look at this traditional kind of, whether it's RTO or a mandate, and really question, is this for me? But conversely, like in your own situation, Dave, if that's not for you, then what is? And that might be even more terrifying to try to answer. So I don't know if we're being gaslighted more than we might possibly gaslighting ourselves in the discovery and pursuit of the truth.
Ooh, ooh.
Can I just piggyback on that? I think that
Yeah.
it's so profound. Is that okay for me to build on her point? I mean, I think that if you look at like sociological and anthropological studies of corporate, which has mostly been in the physical environment, you see that for the most part, you know, the corporation, the hierarchy, the cliques, the rules, they really shape what people think work is about, what their careers are supposed to be, looking up and down, trying to make alliances and so forth. And the tendency is to suspend, or we have suspended, our moral judgment in favor of what constitutes what's best for the corporation as opposed to ourselves, right? So that there's a kind of like suspension of the self that goes into the corporation and then sort of abides by the rules, the laws, the regulations, by which I don't even mean necessarily the policies that are in a book or on a website. I mean the underlying hidden rules, the informal culture that shapes how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to live. And very constraining. It's enormously constraining. You know, it's like this will lead to me doing well, and often it's not about hard work, but it's about like who you know. I mean, it's a very sort of fierce, it's capitalism, right? And it's not surprising that once we've had an opportunity to remove ourselves forcefully, by choice or not by choice, out of the physical constraints, literally, you know, of being disciplined in a sense in corporate life, that we began to have room to rethink about, you know, what is home, what is life, what is the meaning of life, what do I really want? Do I need to be getting up at 6 to like take a 2-hour drive in traffic? I mean, we had the luxury, and by which I really think it's important that it's office workers that have, the knowledge workers that have more of a luxury, more of a privilege, consider, which is not to take away our existential anxiety, but to also think about how we're really part of a larger ecological system, people that are at the bottom and the top who sort of support the office work. Nevertheless, I think the reason why the office is such a pivotal question, what the F is the office, which is what Work Design Magazine has a whole series about here and so forth, is the office has become the kind of symbol of what could be, what we've had before, and what can be in the future. And I think it's interesting to see, and perhaps optimistic to see, architects and others really rethinking. This is not to this like push myself, but I just wrote a really cool article with Hannah Kassam, who is a architect from KPF, and it was so cool to like think about, you know, how could I bring my anthropological insights about how people want meaning and to be creative and inspired in the office and the workspace. And then I was really interested in how you create these, you know, niches and nooks in a workplace. So in a way, I mean, what is the office? I mean, on the one hand, it's like this hellacious place that, you know, certain CEOs are like demanding that we be back in our seats for 5 days a week or whatever that might be. And then there's like the opening up of, this could be a really different environment. Maybe this is an environment that would support my wanting to like move around and be inspired and be creative and think about things. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a utopic view of the office, nor do I have a totally dystopic. I think we're going to end up somewhere in the middle in different places and industries, and people will have really different experiences. But I really like what Denise said about sort of, this is like the first collective time that we were able to sort of sit back and say, hey, wait a second, I'm not really keen on what I was doing before.
Yeah, Melissa, I have something here now, because to tug on what Denise said earlier about the fact that we've all chosen to be in this obscure, let's just call it obscure environment that many of us would have said no to in 2019 or even throughout the pandemic. But we have had and are currently having, and all of our past guests and the people on our team can attest to the fact that we've had some of the most raw, vulnerable, funny, honest, deep conversations ever. I am 36. I've been involved in many Zoom and in-person conversations. This level of depth is rare to experience. And so I guess my question is around, like, it's great to talk about how the environments that we exist within can better serve us from whatever perspective, right? Like ignite our creativity, Zoom rooms that feel more like a pleasant place to be than a prison cell that is really small. You know, the architecture, in other words, that stuff's all really awesome. But if we can't feel psychologically safe or feel a lot of the things that many of us who've come here have felt right now, well then, like, what the fuck? So, like, how do we deal with the cultural sides of it? And I know that there's no one answer to that, and it's probably involving a lot more questions. But I just look around and I see way more discussion happening around how the workplace is evolving from a physicality perspective, and not enough of it from a people perspective. Who wants to start? Whoever wants to start.
I think Denise is done. I had a long time.
So, you know, David talked about like everyone here is being super real and honest. And I suspect that if this same group of people was in a physical room at a table or even in a Zoom room, I feel like we would get the same level of honesty. It's almost like the space itself doesn't matter. And then it goes back to then why is that? And even on like the focus on physical space and workplace and the office, you know, your walls, the desk, your chairs, your computer. The majority of things that we see in our visual line of sight are inanimate objects that don't live or breathe. Only people do. And only we make decisions about how we show up. And we make decisions because we want to feel a certain way. I want to feel less hungry, so I'll eat something. I want to feel accomplished, so I'll take a course. I want to feel less lonely, so I'll meet up with Melissa for a glass of wine. We make decisions because we want to feel certain ways. And I think we made a decision to come here because maybe we felt curious. And maybe we were going to feel seen and heard in this room. And maybe I understood the tone of the language of the marketing for how this event came together. And that's not always going to be the natural case in an office environment or an office setting. But I do suspect that the same group of people, whether we were in person or here in the metaverse, would have a very similar appetite for this very psychologically safe conversation. So I wonder, is it more about how we chose to show up than it is about anything else?
Very much dig that. And then, while I hate being pragmatic because I'd like to live in the clouds, I guess I wonder, like, how does that notion, which I fully believe in, how do we like make an incremental change inside of an organization like Amazon?
Well, it's a tough nut to crack. It's like the Amazon or Goldman Sachs, which are very much kind of like in office and in and back. You know, I don't know how to respond to that because the decision around that in-office kind of lean is so significant from a level of fear of something. You know, you don't want to change because you're afraid of something. But the more moderate folks that are more open towards true flexibility and flexible ways of working or using the office and time to co-locate it, whether it's a third space or a central space, to be very intentional, not only about the design of that space, the reason why anyone would ever go there to begin with, and why we would agree and want to come. And there's a good line, how you make an office a magnet, not a mandate. And how do we shift our leadership behaviors and capabilities on signaling to our people about why to co-locate and come together in any one single location. And that definitely is a leadership shift and a leadership mindset change. And a lot of our conversations, I think, are underpinning the whole psychology that underpins and is causing the shift. But on the practical level, has a lot to do with signaling from leadership.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead, Melissa. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
So you mentioned at the beginning that I just became a senior advisor for workplace culture and design at C4 Consulting. And one of the reasons I really wanted to be part of that was like the focus within the company is on psychologists and other experts Organizations really understand and redesign their culture and their spaces, digital, physical, mental, spiritual, right? And so one of the things that anthropologists do is, yes, it's leadership. Leadership has to take a role, has to be forthcoming and lead, literally. But we usually try to start off with like listening to everyone in the firm, if possible, right? From the top to the bottom, to really understand what are the experiences, the hardships, the anxieties that people are feeling about the office, about getting to the office, about the culture of the particular workplace, whatever that might be. And you really find out, right, that there's not a unified experience even around, like a janitor is going to have a very different experience than, you know, the vice president. And so anthropologists typically go ahead and start listening to people, right, and try to find what are the underlying themes that we can discern, the patterns about the feelings about work. What are the kinds of conversations we can have that are reflective, that are aspirational about what would be an optimal workplace for different kinds of employees? That's the sort of second step. Maybe there's a third step when we start about, okay, let's, instead of going full force that everyone has to go to the office and or nobody, or there's this 3-day mandate or something in between, let's try a tiny experimental model. Let's not go full force across, you know, headquarters or whatever. Let's see and tweak a model of the return to work or office and see, and then maybe we'll scale it up or maybe we'll tweak it. I mean, so it's really quite iterative. I think that we're all kind of trying to, on the one hand, have a very bifurcated conversation, return to office not, trying to find the hybrid, and that we're trying to sort of find answers very quickly. I mean, and that makes sense because the market moves quickly, business moves quickly, but we need to also think long term, right? You know, how do we create these spaces, not overnight, but listening to people, listening to the impact of the place on people, and then also listening to these larger questions that are really cultural questions about the meaning of life. And I don't think that the workplace has ever served as like the absolute site of constructing everybody's total satisfaction or understanding. A huge facet, because we all, or most of us, have to work, right? We have to pay rent, we have to feed our children. I mean, there's a whole issue about what is the underlying economic model that we live in. Obviously, capitalism, for better and for worse. You know, people talk about a more caring capitalism. So on the one hand, you know, your question about how could you fit, quote, Amazon or another company is well taken. But I think as an anthropologist, I also want to pull back and think about, well, what is the broader political economic system in which firms and industries belong and in which we all work within them. And so it's a kind of broader conversation that's both cultural, economic, if that makes sense. That you can't really talk about the cultural issues to me without thinking about the economic underlying institutions and rules that, you know, constitute the necessity for most of us, again, to work. Right. So I think they go a little bit more hand in hand than we typically tend to think about.
Yeah, if I'm synthesizing what both of you are saying, it's like we need to really zoom out, look at what it is about us as humans that makes us show up in the ways that we do. And it then probably becomes somewhat of a ground up sort of change in the sense that, like, it's hard to really turn the cruise ship of Amazon, et cetera. So I think we're going to have some incredible back and forth in the Q&A. I hate these like crystal ball things, but one of the things I used to be an Elon Musk fan. I'm now a little bit more moderate in realizing that some of the technologies that he has are helpful, such as Starlink Internet, but I'm no longer the fanboy that I used to be. And why I say that is my wife used to say, like, I don't really care about getting to Mars. Like, what's going on planet Earth? Like, what's next for us here? And I really have a lot more understanding of what she meant when I used to kind of be more of a fanboy. So I guess that's really my question in the crystal ball sense for each of you, to just give like a 1 or 2 minute answer. It's like, what's next for us? Like from a philosophical standpoint, like where are we going? And I don't really care how tangential or obscure your answer might be, because the whole point of this is exploration. So maybe Denise, if you just want to give a crack at it, I would appreciate it.
You know, so I definitely lean towards futurism. I love that idea of futurist thinking because it really helps you understand and see that, you know, the world doesn't happen to you. You happen to the world. And that is a truth statement. And it's the decisions that we make today that determine the life that we live tomorrow. And it's a very empowered state, and factually it's true. And part of futurism is also looking for signals. So it's kind of like cut through the noise, look for signals of change. And signals is like looking around for are the small things that are happening around you that make you stop and say, huh, and could that be an evolving trend towards where we're going? And one thing I've noticed around me here is I've noticed in the town that I live in and my surrounding towns, I'm in a suburban town outside New York in the state of New Jersey, an enormous amount of fitness places have opened up, but they're unique. They're like small little boutique kind of workout places for maybe one is for people over 40 and so on and so forth. I've just really seen the signal of people being way more aware of their physical bodies and the value of having a sense of well-being to them and what it means. Even beyond that, it really signals to me that we are developing this individual sense of autonomy. And we're beginning to understand and see ourselves as an individual in this world, rather than being somebody on a conveyor belt or kind of on the hamster wheel. And I think that these little things I'm seeing around me really help me understand that people are getting a sense of self. And they're realizing that less is more. And we've been consumers for so long that we've overindulged on media, on other people's other people's thoughts. We're finding our own footing, and we're finding our own place, and we're finding our own voice. And I think this sense of individuality is us beginning to look inside ourselves, about our makeup, the nature of ourselves, and the value that we have, our own intuition, our own sense of creativity, and how we're different to everyone else, and how that's an advantage to you. So I just think, like, looking ahead, we cannot escape the fact that flexibility gives people space in their day to find themselves. And for that reason, we cannot compete against this sense and desire for flexibility. So at some point, we'll figure out the space issue. At some point, we'll reconfigure offices properly. But the emerging trend is, I think, the sense of self and individuality, but ultimately how that plays into how we future-proof ourselves and our businesses, particularly as AI takes away a lot of the stuff we do today. So bigger conversation, but on the ground, I think this sense of self, human at the beginning of it all, and us being empowered, is that groundswell, ground up movement that we've already seen happening. It's going to stick together, I believe, into something a little more concrete as we push into these new ways of working. And bring it on.
Epic, man, epic. Melissa, close us out, and then let's go to Q&A.
Yeah, so I love this notion of grounding, right? I mean, and I think that a lot of us have found the need, to feel grounded, to feel like we belong in our bodies as much as anything else. And, after college, I danced and I performed, and, truth be told, I would be happy pretty much to dance a lot of the day and do some anthropology, and that would be, and see my friends and loved and family, and I love what I do. But one of the things that did ground me was I took yoga, I took dance classes. I took 2 or 3 dance classes a day in between work, and it's a community of, somebody said to me several years ago, when I was pushing my academic career to great heights or aspirations, that you need also communities of joy. I don't actually think they said that. I think that's what I internalized, but I was like, you need to dance, you need to do this. And I had just given up everything in the pursuit of writing this and publishing that and having an endowed professorship. And I'm not saying that anything was wrong with that, but I needed to do it in a more measured way. And I think a lot of us feel that, right? That we need to sort of, have those cups of coffee with people. Yoga classes get kind of not sometimes poo-pooed as if you can't just put a yoga room in a corporation and that will be sufficient. But I don't know, we're not meant to be 8 hours, 10 hours in front of a computer. I personally became an academic in part because I was in an office my first year after college. And I found it very hard to sit down for 10 hours or 8 hours. And I actually ended up, it was a design studio. It wasn't even a traditional office. It was down in Soho. We were doing all kinds of things. And I worked it out with them. They were like, okay, we get it. You go take a dance class in the middle of the day, take 2 hours to dance, come in at 8 instead of 9. We're cool. They were artists and stuff. And, that sort of, I think that's one of the reasons I ended up so invested in studying the workplace, because I was so, it was so clear to me about the constraints, even very early on, 20 or 21, about what, I felt like I was in a golden key. It was a lovely place to work. It was a wonderful design studio, but outside, across the way, I could see a dance studio, so near and yet so far, and it was just so symbolic of how I felt. And I just feel that it's a wonderful thing in a way that we're exploring these issues and ideas, and we have to do it together. We can't just do it individuals. I mean, a lot of the conversation has been moving between this idea of agency. We have personal agency, but we have collective agency. We have to make these changes together. It's not going to just happen. It's great. Obviously we have to make individual choices for ourselves under whatever, but we need to build bridges and be really creative and create exciting things that will enable us to really have better futures in an age in which everybody is so despondent, concerned about climate change. The murder, of many people of color. I mean, and it's a really tough moment to be living, but there's always light in the darkness.
What a great final few words. There's always light in the darkness. Guys, thank you so much. That was incredible. I'm gonna pass it to Chris.
Man, I don't know that I want it. That was epic. Thank you for that. Just listening to signals and grounding and agency and, being exposed and having, some real raw sort of thinking and conversation around this table today was amazing. The chat has been busy. Lots of comments and thoughts. I'd like to just open it. If anybody has something to say, let's just start a conversation. Stephen.
Just throw it right over there, eh, Chris?
You bet.
Wow, there's been so many
You
points
got it.
here, and I've had a couple on chat, and I'm like, wow, where do I dig in even? So I guess the last one I just posted, top of mind for me, but talking about futurism and this the ability to work less and not more. As I was putting in the little note there, that seems like every time we had a technological revolution, it ended up making us work more and not less, which seems to be backwards. And that's why sometimes when people mention the rise of AI and Chat GPT and taking jobs, I'm like, well, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that's what should be happening, because it's what we have felt like should happen for a long time. And how do we start to roll in a lot of the things around us, such that we can still live even if our lives don't revolve around work and earning money? I could think of things like universal basic income and healthcare reform and all those types of things that are going to have to happen to make some of the rest of this all fall in place and come together cleanly.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, I know you have some thoughts.
No, I always, I have to say, this is officially my favorite episode and conversation so far. This has been so amazing. I thought, I like this idea that was talked about the status, and when we're together in person, there can be this hierarchy, right, of oh, that's the CEO, or that's the janitor, and everything in between, and in a way those are sort of walls, I think, in a way that prevent some honest communication, or people, I think it was mentioned in the chat, can feel like they don't want to say something for being judged and things like that. And I think of also the talking about the walls of an office, and that we're not meant to be in front of a computer all day, which I agree with, but I also think that the computer is evolving, right? It evolved from being actual people to machines, and we have phones that have evolved, if you will, if use the term, to computers in our pockets. I do think that part of what I'm excited about in the future is thinking about the tools that we use today, like computers, not being the thing that we see them in today, right? We see augmented reality coming, and I think at some point the computer part will be much less tethered to a desk than before, and hopefully that means we as people are much less tethered to a desk or any other place. We might still be doing computing work and connecting with each other like this, but that doesn't mean we're sitting in one place all the time. And those walls of status and the walls of where we are and where we choose to work and with whom, I see crumbling down in a good way, because there's so much that can be born out of those ashes, I think, and a lot of that was touched on here. So just great conversation, really enjoyed it.
I just want to call out one thought that Alyssa just had, is that 40 hours a week in an office made sense when you left work there. Anyone care to expand on that?
I love what just the betwixt and between. I love that phrase so much. I think I might put it on the blimp, but it reminds me of that.
Just to be fair, betwixt and between is a term that was coined by an anthropologist named Victor Turner, Victor Turner, Turner, who is one of like the founders of what's called symbolic or cultural anthropology. I don't want to take it for my own, but I have to say I love this idea of the physical walls of status falling down. I love that idea. You know, I think living in the heart of New York, and I studied Wall Street for my first book, you know, you're just incredibly aware of status, right? And the performance of status in offices, networking afterwards, you know, what you talk about, you know, class and status, even though we think we're not a class society, we often really are. And I wonder what people think. I guess it's a question more than my own answer, is like, do the symbols and performances of status, what we talk about, how we, you know, because we're not showing up, and even in our avatars with like, not that I ever would. Presume Google makes purses, but I don't even know that. But whatever, you know. I mean, I don't know, because I'm not like a fashion maven. But I, you know, I mean, I did have to wear certain things when I did Wall Street work. I mean, I couldn't just go in there with like grungy outfit. And so my question to us is like, does the metaverse create a space in which status, at least certain status symbols and ways of interacting, is it not just the physical walls that are dissolving, but it's like something in the metaverse allow us to be more free and to be less tied to certain positions and expressions of identity? I kind of think so.
So Melissa, I think that's a great question. And I know that Dave and I, part of the reason that we started this whole experiment was just that. That's this squarely in the center of our thesis.
I mean, it kind of makes all sense, because, I mean, in a moment in which we're talking, I mean, all my students, right, or many of them have different pronouns and they, and we're really talking much more about gender fluidity, sexual identity fluidity. And I mean, maybe the concerns that we started off talking about, like the bifurcation, like the questioning of what is reality, what is truth, what is fiction. Maybe we just have to learn how to move between, you know, not live in such a binary world. And I think we already are not living in these binary worlds, but it's comforting, like, to know you're one thing or the other. Maybe it's for us to sort of increasingly learn what it's like to feel that a certain amount of uncertainty is part of life, you know, that being not one thing or the other is sort of part of what's constantly, you know, going on in the search for meaning. I think it's quite uncomfortable most of the time, but can also be very freeing, right? I mean, sort of, you're not completely constrained. I guess that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just something that comes up a lot in the virtual world, as we'll hear people say or you see in the media, you know, oh, I prefer, you know, real life or in person. And I've kind of, I've been gently training Dave, I think, on that. This is real life for those of us that come to work and network every day in the virtual world. It's just as real. The relationships are just as deep. the conversations are just as meaningful as you can see here. So I more in person versus real life, because I think to your point, this is very real. It's just in a different modality that it helps to extend our choices that we've talked about. I'll talk too much, so I need to open the floor for other people. I'm very passionate about this. This is so great.
I can expand on that just a little bit too. As you know, my experimentation in the metaverse has definitely taken me down the path of the notion of pseudonymy versus anonymity, right? And it's interesting how people present avatar to avatar, and if they have a choice, are we talking about skeuomorphism? Do you create your own self? Do you create your own version of yourself if you have the opportunity to change, or not? And there's a lot of depth behind that thinking.
Tyler has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Melissa was saying about, that there was, she has students who express their identity in ways that weren't really accepted before. I've been a teacher as well who, I'll call you whatever you want to be called, right? And I think that experience of putting the power in the hands of the other, right? Especially when it is concerned with their own identity and like how they are expressing themselves. I think it's really, really important that we stop taking power from other people that doesn't belong to us, right? And that is what, to me, so much of the return to office conversation is about, or even like, we talked about how we're showing up, right? And why we chose to be here and those sorts of things. I think that's why you find more psychological safety in places that have an opt-in, right? And you've given that person the power to decide for themselves what is for them, right? And when we, what's really weird is that in my experience, workplaces that give individuals the power to decide where they work very often have the most engaged, highest productivity from their workforce. It is not the command and control companies that are successful. It is the collaborate and connect companies that are successful. It's really important that we stop pretending that telling people what to do makes them more productive.
Tyler, I wonder to that point, is it a perspective shift on, is it less that people are taking power from you, or not from you indirectly, I mean the collective, or are we willing to give it away? And
No,
why
I think it's
afraid of?
It is a chicken egg problem, right? Like which thing is it? And to me, the fundamental like what's on offer at workplaces for the most part has been, it is a privilege to work here. You should thank us for even existing, right, inside this office, right? And I think that, for me, I want to work in a place that says you're in charge of yourself. We're grateful for the labor that you bring here. Nobody's stuck where they happen to be working, especially now that there's way more companies that are willing to work on a flexible way. So yeah, it's really important for us to, if we're going to be successful workplaces going forward, we need to be able to embrace that the people that work for us aren't stuck.
Yeah, that's awesome, Tyler. That's awesome. Just we could do this for days. Denise and Melissa, you guys are absolute badass mamma jamma. It is 1:30, and we do want to get a photo op. And we do have all of this, is going to be released. So I can't personally wait to sit down with this one once it's back on YouTube. So if we could, guys, I'm going to go ahead and pop the table up, and we'll take a picture here. And we do have POAP, if anybody understands or knows what POAPs are in the other room. So if everybody wants to come on over here, we can get a picture.
We'll look at
Get
the
rid
camera.
Get rid of the tables.
Yeah, I think I just hit the
So
right.
which way are we
Sorry,
moving?
no worries.
We're going to
There
go
we go.
towards the pictures of Denise and Melissa so that we can stand in front of their lovely
Okay.
faces. Thank you guys so much, everybody who came. And
This
yeah,
was great.
I echo what Chris said. This was, I think, we always say this, lately we've been saying this is our best session. I think I'm going to go on record in saying that this is going to be really difficult to be. Very difficult. Come on over, Denise.
Indeed.
Stand with us.
Steven, I keep standing in front of you here.
I would say too, like that. This is the thing: is this is an ongoing river. It doesn't
I'm sorry
have a
that
beginning or an end.
sorry
So
that I'm in front of you,
come
John.
back.
It's just a little like I'm not good at this.
You're okay.
It's all good.
Just dance, Melissa. You're good at that.
That's right. Yeah. And
Whoever's
thank you.
getting the picture,
Camera.
if you'll let us know that you've got it, that would be good. We can emote if we want to. We want to
We'll just
wave.
let's do some emoting. I know he's kind of grabbing it as we go. So if anyone, you can use that emote panel on the right hand side.
You can dance around. You can do whatever you want.
Yes. That's awesome. Well, I would start the dance party, man.
Oh yeah, the dancing is really fun.
BT's
All
in
right.
here. I think we got it. We got to have something.
That's funny.
All right. Does anyone know what a POAP is? And if anyone does, if they would
It
like
stands
one.
for Proof of Attendance Protocol. I learned that recently through knowing Chris. And beyond that, I don't really know anything about what it means. But I.
Hey, we're learning together.
Super nerdy. We're learning together, and it's okay if you don't. And if you're not interested, that's fine too.
Hey, Sarah, do we have a copy of this chat? Because I was unable to keep up with it. I definitely want to read this.
Always, always, and we got it recorded too. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
My man, Chris Early,
Great.
you were here. Where's Chris Early? Chris Early is a friend of mine for like 3 years running. We've never met in person. He's flying out to Prince Edward Island in less than a month to be with me and my family for a week. And I can't wait to see him.
That's cool. There's this weird thing that we need a name for in society where you have relationships that you've developed virtually, and then there's this crazy deja vu feeling when you meet them in person that I can't describe. So tell me how that goes.
Me and Chris Moeller have already had that. First time we met, he flew up here in the dead of winter in February of this year, and we experienced the exact same thing that you described. And one of the things he said to me when we first met, as I said, Chris, like, what are we doing? And he's just like, Dave, we're building it. We're doing it right now. He basically, it was like the Seinfeld episode where they're like, this is the show.
You're in the show.
This is the show. You're in it.
Can I share with you guys this too? During that conversation, I got a DM from Dave, and I reminded him once again, this is the show. This is the show. We're in it.
This was amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah,
We're all
thank you.
just
Come
finding
back
out
anytime.
Anybody wants a POAP, come on over here.
Sorry, Rob, what were you going to say, Rob?
Said we're all we're learning how.
Yeah, we're all connected. We're just learning how. That's deep, man. That's deep. I dig that.